Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Join Up Dots. Today's guest is someone who used to call himself an RNT. If you're wondering what that is, it's a recovering negative thinker. Well, actually, he considered himself a lot worse than that, but kids could be listening, so we'll leave it as that. His life was not good, his relationships weren't working, and all in all, things were not in a good place. But he decided that it didn't have to remain that way. He realised that the life that he was leading and experiencing was actually being directed by the thoughts that he allowed to pass through his mind on a daily basis. He was actually creating the miserable existence that he was living. But could he get out of it? Could he rewire his brain to focus in on the positive aspects of his life, therefore changing direction on the path he had been leading for decades? In effect, taking responsibility for his own happiness. Well, with a huge yes, our guest not only did that, but now calls himself the Mantor, as he helps men from across the world to focus in on their negative actions and reprogram the way they operate on a daily basis. Our guest today is Mr. Steven Shewach.
Welcome to Join Up Dots, amazing conversation. Join Up Dots, get a dose of motivation. Join Up Dots, don't forget the inspiration. Welcome to the place that's got the light. Join Up Dots, join Up Dots, join Up Dots, join Up Dots. Join up dots.
Yes, as I said in the introduction, we're speaking to Steven Shewach today. And I've had a little bit of a problem leading into this, and all the computers have gone belly up, and I've been clicking here and clicking there. But I can see his lovely, attractive face looking at me on Skype at the moment. So hopefully, when I say hello to him, he's going to say hello back to me. Hello, Steven. How are you, sir?
Hello to you.
How is life in America today?
Life in America today is wonderful, as it is every day.
Is it generally wonderful every day? Because I've heard that your winter this year has been a bit brutal, to say the least.
It has been. I live in the Pacific Northwest on the western seaboard in Portland, Oregon, and it was a fairly light winter except for the 5 days that my wife and I couldn't leave our house because of the snow.
And so that was special snuggle times in your life, was it?
Sure, yeah.
I bet you asked for that snow to come down just to get that.
My wife wanted it more than I did because she's a school teacher, so she didn't have to go to work for a few days.
And so do you work at home on a daily basis?
Yes, I am definitely someone who uses my computer to interact with the people that are my clients. I do some face-to-face work in the city that I live in and hope to be traveling more, doing live events at some point, but I definitely work from home. I don't have an office.
So as the introduction was saying, you call yourself the Mantor, and you help people reprogram their brain, rewire their brain. What does that actually mean, though, rewiring yourself?
Sure. The technical term, at least in the scientific community, is neuroplasticity, and it has to do with the neural networks of our brain. I am not a scientist, but basically it's, everything that we do is based on our thoughts. It's based on our belief systems and our constructs of what happens in the mind, and then it tells our body, our brain tells our body to do things and move muscles. So in terms of perception, how we see the world and what we think reality is, what I figured out is that we can play with that. You're not just given a particular way of seeing the world and you're stuck with it. If you want to muck around, you can. And so I did. And so instead of saying neuroplasticity, which is a fun word, but it's hard to spell, I talk about rewiring the brain because people understand, they get that image of literally a bunch of wires in a circuit breaker box, and you just start pulling things around. And it's not quite so haphazard as that, but you can change the flow of electricity, so to speak, or the way that your thoughts manifest inside of your head to a perception or a lens that is more positively oriented.
Do you know that,
So,
that was probably the hardest thing that I did there, not to go, so what do you mean? What do you mean? And jump in. So you're saying, as far as you're concerned, that you can muck around with reality.
absolutely.
What does that mean, though?
Well, reality is what we decide it's going to be. Right?
Well, yes, yeah. But how can you muck around with something, you know? Is it your perception? Is that where reality comes from? Or
I think so. I mean, I think our reality comes from many things. Our childhood, our parents, our teachers, our clergy, mass media, all of these things, they put thoughts into our minds, right? And life is hard. Okay, well, how do you know that? Well, maybe because that's what your parents told you, and you saw them working hard, and they were blue-collar workers, and they were always struggling. Is that a fact, or is that just someone's version of reality, but someone else might have a different version of reality? So what happened to me was I had a very limited scope of how I thought the world worked. And it mostly started with kind of a scarcity mentality. I believed I had, and I don't know how I got this in my mind. I don't really care so much about why that happened or how that happened. All I know is I figured it out and I did something about it. But I believed that I had a finite amount of certain things, a finite amount of intelligence that could never grow. I had a finite amount of prosperity potential, earning potential. I had a finite amount of love that I could give out and that I could probably handle receiving. And so what happens when you have this scarcity mentality, and even worse, I thought that someone could come and take little chunks, little pieces off of my tiny little nuggets that I had that couldn't even grow. And so when you have that perspective, you defend it, right?
Yeah.
You're like
absolutely.
a bear backed into a corner with a big claw. And anytime someone comes near your little stash of whatever you think you have and it's never going to grow, you just kind of lash out at them. And what that looks like in the real world when you have this thought process or this way of taking information and stimulus into your brain, it looks like a megalomaniac narcissist asshole, which is what I used to be for decades.
So the fascinating thing in that whole statement for me was you say that you have these beliefs, and I don't dispute that in any shape or form, but that you don't really care how they came to be. Because if you sort of found out how they came to be, wouldn't that be the easier path to fixing yourself?
Well, sure. I mean, to some degree, but listen, I've been in a fair amount of therapy over the years in my life, starting in my teenage years when my parents were getting divorced and on and off throughout my adulthood. I tried all different types of therapy, psychoanalysis, master's level counselors, cognitive-based therapy. I was on low-level depression drugs, antidepressants at certain points in my life. I mean, I've tried a bunch of things. I've tried working on myself. I knew something wasn't right, and I just was having trouble getting a feeling of satisfaction or fulfillment in my life. And the truth of the matter is that when you go to therapy, and I'm not disparaging the mental health community in any way, but I got lost. I went down rabbit holes, and I might be there for weeks on end with a particular therapist about what happened to me when I was 7 years old. And I just don't know how valuable that is.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what I'm more focused in on is, can I see that something isn't working for me or is holding me back? And can I think about how I might be able to change that so that it doesn't feel so misery inducing and so like internally having a sense of personal suffering that I was bringing upon myself.
And was this
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. Was it like a dawning realization that you had a problem and you needed to fix it yourself, or was it just like an epiphany?
I would say it was a little bit of both. I wish I had a story that was like, rays of light shone down on me and the angels were singing. It wasn't quite like that, but I did have what I call the big insight about 2 years ago. And it happened, I actually made a timeline of what was going on with me at that time. And, excuse me, I do believe that it came down to about a 3-day period. And a couple of things happened.
That's amazing, isn't it? Three days.
Yeah, yeah, and it's what happened was, my wife and I were in couples counseling. We had been married for a couple of years. I was already on my second marriage. My first one didn't work out. I call it a starter marriage. We had no house, no kids. It was just kind of a do-it-yourself, walk away kind of a thing. And I was also, so we were in couples counseling, and the couples counseling was amazingly making things worse. It was a bizarre thing that happened to me, but what it was the therapy was shining like a big spotlight on my distortions. I was delusional. I was what I call functionally delusional. Like I was around and I was in the world and I was working and, could maintain financial accountability and things like that. But I was delusional about how I saw the world.
Did other people tell you that you were delusional, or did they just?
No, what they told me was, you're a jerk. You are, you're narrow-minded. You are bossy. You are always on my case about things. That's what it looked like from other people, because when you have zero self-love, zero self-worth, you replace that by externalizing onto other people what you want. Like, everyone's a mirror. You're a mirror to me. Whatever you say, I either agree with it, I see myself in you, or I don't see myself. But either way, we get glimmers into our own perspectives by interacting with other people. And so a lot of things used to trigger me. So when I was projecting, I mean, this is classic psychological understandings, foundational concepts. When you tell someone that they're not doing something right, you're really talking to yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I used to tell people, I used to try and control people. I was like the director of their lives. I was writing their own scripts, and instead of letting people be who they were, I was trying to get in there and muck around with their own minds rather than work on myself. And that causes massive, massive relationship problems over and over again, year in and year out, for decades.
So are you a very strong character, Steven? The fact that so many people were saying, you're a jerk, you're this, you're that, but you still kept on the same path?
Strong character. I guess I'm someone who can get impassioned about things. I care about certain things. I used to care about too many things, to the point that I was trying to control other people and how they thought, how they behaved, how they acted. I care about fewer things, but I probably care about them more. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. I understand everything you're saying, but as I said to you before we started recording, I've always been a happy person. I've always just floated along. Nothing ever bad happens to me. I am the classic, the squirrels make my breakfast and the bluebirds make my cup of tea. It's just always as it is. And if I go into an airport and there are 1,000 people trying to get a hire car, I will just walk past and get the first hire car. It just naturally happens to me. And people say I'm lucky, people say I'm this, people say I'm that. So although I'm fascinated with what you're saying, and I totally understand what you're saying, I find it hard to actually link it in any way to my life, because we're so sort of polar opposite.
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating, because I wrote a blog post about this that has a swear word in it, so I will switch out the swear word, and it's called "Hey Positivity Gurus, F you, stop being so unempathetic." And what I'm trying to say in that title, certainly it's a little bit of shock value in a title like that, but people like you, the old me, I couldn't stand people like you. I couldn't stand people who seemed to have figured out kind of the secret of life, of that, not getting their feathers ruffled, not getting worked up about things, able to just let things roll off their shoulder, not getting worried or anxious. You were like, without knowing it, people like you were like my nemesis.
Yeah, yeah.
And nothing infuriated me more, actually, than having someone with what I call a default positivity lens or orientation, than when they would say, hey, man, just do it. Or stay positive, or, it'll be all right. And, or the what I call the grand poobah of them all, like the granddaddy, is don't worry.
I've used all of those.
Telling someone who
I've got them tattooed up my arm.
Well, it's telling someone who has a negative default orientation, meaning when stimuli comes in, interacting with another person, a car usually driven by another person, typically. Really everything kind of comes down to people who are doing things, except for acts of nature, perhaps. But like, let's say it starts raining. I would be upset about that rather than just take it for what it was. Like, that's literally arguing. We were talking about reality before. You're arguing with reality that can't be changed.
It's funny that you say that, though.
Can I change?
It's funny that you say that, because if it's raining here, my wife always goes, "Oh, it's raining," and I always go, "Oh, it's only wet sunshine."
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. It doesn't bother you. And for the longest time, I tried to figure out why someone like yourself was born that way. Was it your parents? To what you asked before, I'm less interested in how that came to pass, as opposed to me getting over to your side, to your default. I just had to work a little harder to get there, because it just didn't happen automatically. But it was infuriating for me for the longest time to have someone suggest to me that in an instant I can and should just pick up the pieces of my miserable life and move on, as if it was that easy.
Mm. And so what was your response to them when they gave you these nuggets of advice?
In my head, I was swearing profusely at them and feeling awful and dejected and jealous, probably, and envious of, what are they on? Are they must not, they're not really living a real life. They're faking it, or they're sugarcoating it or something. I really didn't understand it. And what happened was, I call these people, by the way, people like you, forever pozzos, Pozzos. I made up that word, meaning forever positive. Like, that's just, you're just there. You're always feeling positive. And there's a lot of people who are in this space, like the gurus who write books, and they're trying to sell their products to people like me. And I don't think they understand it. That's why the title of this blog post is about saying, stop being so unempathetic. If you, in the same way that you said, you just don't get it. It's not even in your DNA to, like, see something in a negative way.
No, you're right. Absolutely.
So you're the last person in the world who could tell someone like me, or the old me, how to fix it if you've never felt low-level chronic anxiety and depression for decades. How could you possibly tell me, because you have no empathy, if you've never felt that before?
So if we get back to those 3 days,
yes,
where because that is the classic join up dots. I think that is the fundamental point of your entire existence, where you are now. Those 3 days, and yes, I find that amazing. That most people go, oh, it was a 3-year progression, it was 2-year progression, whatever. But you can actually narrow it down to 3 days. So if you'd be good enough to tell us what actually happened over that period of time.
Yes, and let's be clear. I think that a bunch of things were happening prior to that were setting me up for what appeared to actually be 3 days. There were lots of things that had been happening and understandings or lack of understandings that were moving me in that direction. But in that period of 3 days, and I often talk about, how people have, I'm going to answer your question, by the way, David, I promise. But how people have these like life-altering moments. They have like a near-death car crash or something like that.
Yeah.
And they walk away, the car is completely mangled, and somehow they walk away with not even a scrape on them. And in that moment, like they say their life flashes in front of them, and they have a completely different perspective about life after that. It's a transformative moment that started with the possibility of ending their physical presence in their physical body, in this realm that we live in. And it shifts for them, and they value their life. They value the people in their life. And they say, I will never waste another day. I will live every day as if it's my last, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm fascinated by that process. In fact, I wrote another blog post about maybe I should start a business that creates near-death car crashes, but nothing ever actually happens. I think I could make a ton of money getting people so scared.
Groundhog Day, that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Drive them over a cliff and they're all right the next day.
You drive them over a cliff, and at the very end, there's some kind of a trampoline at the end, and they don't actually die. But they get the result of that. And I'm fascinated by that process. And so for me, instead of a car crash, thank goodness it wasn't something that serious, but I was looming towards a second divorce. And so we were in couples counseling, as I mentioned. It was focusing a tractor beam of light on my distortions and delusions. I was projecting things onto my wife. I was in individual counseling also at the time. And our fights were epic. They were, door slamming, screaming, yelling, awful fights. And I got to this point, this threshold, that I said, I cannot live my life like this anymore. I can't function with this kind of drama and stress and insanity that keeps coming up in my life over and over again. I just can't do it. And I tried to project into the future. And I said, if I get divorced, which will be both humiliating to me and super sad, I'm going to find myself probably in another relationship in a few years having the same situation happen to me. And then I started thinking about other relationships in my life. I started thinking about other, jobs and career. And I started saying, I'm going to keep finding myself never satisfied about anything. And so I had this succession of thoughts that happened. And I said to myself, wait a second. I'm the common denominator in the middle of all this. Like a math equation, or I'm sure over in the UK, Peanuts, the cartoon. Perhaps there was a particular character named Pigpen who used to walk around with a little dust cloud around him. He was a dirty kid. I was like that, except my dust cloud was a drama cloud, and it was swirling around me all the time, and I was at the center of it. And so during that couple days, the therapy that we were in, the couples counseling, I was literally reading lists to the therapist about all the things my wife was not doing in the marriage. I wrote lists, like, not cleaning properly, not folding the laundry properly, insane. And I saw this, and I was like, I was able to get a little bit out of my own head to see the insanity of that. And so this succession of thoughts went like this. I created this drama over these decades. I created the strife and angst and resentment. And all of the people like yourself, I wanted to get to you. I wanted to get to your way of seeing the world. And so that's when I said, wait a second, it's a choice. I have been choosing this negative lens. I've been choosing to be a victim. I've been choosing to externalize and blame other people, which means I never have any personal power and I never feel satisfied. So that means that if that's a choice, I can choose to feel positive. I can choose to feel joy. I can choose to feel happiness. But that's an awkward thing to do if you're not used to doing it. It's like training a new muscle group or learning how to do a new skill set. And so I made two proclamations. I made one really big proclamation around that time during those 3 days. And I said to my wife, I will never fight with you again.
And did she believe you?
No. And I didn't know how to do it, but I just didn't see any other way of stopping this insanity. So I went from, I've been choosing this old way that hasn't been working for me, to then claiming 100% responsibility and accountability for my life up until that point, to that moment, and for the future, all of it. And in that process, I started to feel powerful. And I'm not talking about power over people. I'm talking about a sense of peace and alignment and I don't want to say control. It's probably not quite the right word, but a sense of
expansion.
Yes, and mastery and understanding that my ego was. I like to make up lots of names, and so I now have diagnosed what I had for all those years. And it's OES, which stands for obese ego syndrome.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And I fed my ego really awful, bad for you thoughts in the same way that we feed our bodies bad, awful food, empty calories. So I was feeding myself negative, self-limiting, lack of self-love, perceptions, thoughts about who I was, how I interacted with the world, what I had to offer the world, what kind of value I could bring to the world, and then as part of that, I gave away all my power to everyone else, and I said, the world is responsible for making me happy.
Did they think you were having a breakdown? Because if you've been a certain way all your life, and then suddenly in these 3 days you were becoming a different person, surely those people that were so used to you being in a certain way must have gone, hang on, what's happening here?
Well, it was, having a realization in your head and the feelings that go with it, the sense of expansion you were talking about, that can stay inside for a while.
So you didn't show it in these 3 days? You didn't just...
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Choir and all that kind of stuff. That was me singing, by the way. That
was a very good sound effect.
It was good, wasn't it? Yeah.
But what I started to do after that was I started to explore all kinds of things that I never would have thought were even in my frame of reference or my purview. I started reading about spirituality and just open to all kinds of experiences. And what I was talking about before about the scarcity mentality, there's a really good framework that was helpful for me. And one part of what was happening during those 3 days was a book that I had been reading. And it's called Mindset by a US-based psychologist named Carol Dweck, who I believe currently is now teaching at Stanford University, but earlier when she did most of her research, it was at Harvard University in Boston. And she talks about a framework that has two mindsets, a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. So you have a growth mindset. You were just born that way, which is awesome. I had a fixed mindset. I changed my fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And so you look at a situation and you see potential, you see possibility, you see options. And I see the same thing, whatever it is. We could be looking at a physical three-dimensional object or just a scenario where something happened and it might have caused strife for me, and you were like, well, this is not ideal, but I'm going to choose to see. It's the whole glass half full, half empty. Yeah. But she went really deep into it from a pedagogical perspective, doing research, and her model of fixed versus growth mindset. When I read the book, I was going through my memories and I was plugging in little moments from my life where I was feeling really sad or angry, and I would plug it into this, and out the other end came this confirmation that I had had a fixed mindset my whole life. Now, I still have a fixed mindset about certain things, but I'm aware of it. But generally, I switched my default reaction to most things to a positivity orientation. And one of the most noticeable places where that I can see that is in my driving habits. I was a road rage driver.
Right. Okay.
My wife was right on the fence with saying she was never going to drive with me again because I would be enraged by other people, and it was almost as if, you know, this obese ego. I thought I own the road. Like, you know, how dare you be driving slower than I want you to drive in front of me, making me late, you know, to an appointment or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now that I realize that, listen, everyone is operating at different speeds, literally in their cars, but in their minds. They don't need to all match up to me. Everyone's kind of doing their own thing, and we're just working together somehow for the greater good of humanity. And once I was able to deflate my ego and see that I wasn't the center of everything, and be able to focus my attention onto understanding other people and where they're at instead of expecting them to be who I wanted them to be, my life got easier by 1,000-fold.
And that's the key thing. I think in every episode that I discuss these subjects with people, once they find their thing, then everything becomes easy. Once they find their passion, then the money that they've been striving so hard doing for 50, 60 hours a week becomes easy. Why do you think, why do you think that is such a truth that so many millions of people will say, yes, that's true, but we still find it hard to believe until it actually occurs to us?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to the last part first, and then to the other part of your question about when something happens to us, like you read something in a book, it's just words, right? I mean, they're just ideas, they're just thoughts. You can say you understand how something works versus knowing how something works. To me, there's a difference. There's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. Wisdom comes from experiencing it through your mind or your body or both, where you truly understand something because it happened at a visceral DNA level, as opposed to, oh, I've read about that, or, you know, things happening in other countries, but it's just knowledge.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So that helps answer the first part of your question about when people are searching and they're wanting a sense of alignment, fulfillment, peace, joy, happiness, contentment, all of those things. I actually classify that under a bigger heading, which is the word love. And so when a person, and these are just my opinions, I can't prove these to be facts. Again, to what we first started talking about with reality, my reality is only mine. I'm not even sure if I'm talking to you right now.
No, I'm here. I promise you.
Okay. All right.
If you were closer, I would touch you.
Okay, good.
But in a professional way, obviously.
Of course, yes. But I only understand this from my reality, and to that end, I was searching and searching and searching for a long time, and I thought that all of the things that I wanted were outside of me. And this is a very common thing that happens to people. So they're looking for money, or they're looking for another person, perhaps in a relationship, or they're looking for, you know, career and stature and recognition. And those are all going to send you down a path of never feeling like you get it. This is what I think. And so when it happens for someone, what they're really doing is they are claiming or reclaiming, one or the other, probably reclaiming, but that they are reclaiming their personal sovereign power as a living, breathing
Their
human
authentic
being.
self.
Yes, I was trying not to use the word authentic. I don't think there's anything wrong with the word.
Everyone
authentic,
uses it. Go on, Stephen, use it.
except it's overused.
It is.
But the fact of the matter is that's really the best word that fits there. So I'll just use it. So, and what we've done over the years, especially as we move from childhood into young adulthood and finally into adulthood, is again, for no specific reasons, but by means of people or society. But what tends to happen is that people cover up that authentic self with social expectations, with beliefs about who they're supposed to be because of stereotypes, perhaps. And so they're moving further and further away from that original source of who they were. And then comes the problems. Then comes the feelings of I'm not good enough, or I don't understand why I'm having relationship problems, or I'm never successful enough. All of the I don't have blank comments.
Yeah,
the things that you don't have.
I tell you, I'm going to give you my personal beliefs now, and it's only my personal beliefs. But first of all, I'm just going to play the iconic speech as the show's based around of Steve Jobs. And
please,
once we listen to this, I'm then going to tell you what my train of thought is around all this. So let's listen to what Steve says again.
Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever, because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart even when it leads you off the well-worn path, and that will make all the difference.
Now, my belief on this, and this has started to become evident to me over the last maybe 4 or 5 years, is yes, you've got to go with gut, you've got to go with destiny, karma, and all those other things going forward, and just, try stuff. But if you actually stop, all of us stop, and look back at our lives, we will see key parts when we were having a good time. We were enjoying ourselves. We were feeling complete. We were earning more money. And if I look at all the things that have led me to this point, they were pretty much the things that I found easiest. I found it easier to communicate. I found it easier to connect. I found it easier to do a Skype call. I found it easier. Now, what I'm doing now, hopefully, is going to make a huge difference to people's lives. And hopefully, people will be listening to this on the way to work, on the way home to work, and thinking, yes, I can do something different with my life. I just need to find that. Now, my belief is we all actually know what we should be doing. We just actually have to look back and look at the times when we were happiest. And if we can find those connections, then that's going to give us a bloody good indication of what we should be doing with our life. That's what I think anyway.
Yeah, I think I mostly agree with that. And the reason I say mostly is because it's relative to what you might say was a happy time for you and what I might say was a happy time for me.
Yeah.
So that's where the mostly comes from. But interestingly, I'm fascinated by chronology, and I use that in my own life to understand milestones and things that have happened to me. So I'm very date driven. That's just how my brain seems to like information structured. So in the same way that I mentioned, I made a timeline about all the things that kind of have happened to me over the last couple of years. And that's how I was able to isolate those 3 days. I also made a timeline of how I was able to claim my current and likely last focus of mine professionally and personally as long as I'm here on Earth, working with men. And so I started making a little timeline of things that gender issues that I didn't understand or that I was struggling with. And I've been able to trace them back to my teenage years. And so when you talk about going back and connecting the dots, that's exactly what I did. So I just updated this timeline, by the way, with a memory of when I was 16 years old. And I thought it was really important because my father had one, to get a man purse or a man bag. Okay, he had one. That's a very European thing to do. Perhaps you've had one or you have one.
I've had more than one.
In the United States, it's not very common.
Pink with fur on it as well.
What's that?
Pink with fur on it. No, not really. Honestly, not really.
Yes, and bejeweled. So I remember thinking as a 16-year-old, part of the reason I wanted one was because my dad had one, yes. But the other reason is why do women get a device to carry their stuff around in and guys have to shove it in all their pockets? And I wanted that. Like I wanted that. Now that's, I know, kind of a benign, stupid thing when you compare it to equal pay, equal rights, and all that kind of stuff. But the point is that I can trace back things relating to gender questions or inquiries that I had from my teenage years all the way up until now, and linking that together, connecting those dots, certainly has been helpful to me and has given me my ability to say what my mission is now from here through the rest of my life.
And it is fascinating, isn't it? Because if I look at your CV, for example, I was looking at it last night because I like to do a little bit of research, and you had a hell of a lot of jobs. It was like a job every 3 weeks, it seemed, on your timeline. And then once you hit your path, it started to slow down. And now being the Mantor, that's it. Nothing else is encroaching into that at all. It's just going on and on and on.
So in terms of jobs, I mean, I've been exploring and looking. I do have a wide set of interests, relatively wide. I mean, I'm into technology. That's been consistent through my life. I'm into design and architecture and building. That's been consistent in my life. I've been into entertainment, and that's been consistent. And I've had jobs in all those fields. But when I also look back through the decades, I see this connecting of dots relating to gender, my own masculinity, questioning what it meant, what is it supposed to mean to be a man, and a very great need and desire to have male friendships that were deep and not surface and peripheral. So when I do look back and see how this has all come together, it's really amazing, because kind of to what you said, it makes sense now, but that whole thing of you have 20/20 vision when you look backwards, I mean, a lot of things make a lot of sense once you've looked back. The question for me is and that Steve Jobs quote is, how do you use that as a launching pad to forge and create the future? Because the future is just the right now in succession, one after another. That is the future. So that's why I have such a strong belief system about the power of my thoughts and the energy that they hold, the intentionality that they hold, and how that creates from this moment forward what will happen with me and the rest of the world, with me and the people that I interact with me and things that have I don't want to sound too woo-woo-y, but everything's got a vibrational frequency. And the more I focus on my positive aspects of things and not limit myself by having negative thoughts, I see more and more things happen that I truly want, that truly match what I'm desiring now, and they manifest. And so it's crazy. I thought it was all a bunch of craziness before, but I can tell you from my own experience, and that's all I have, is that it works. I have literally attracted certain people with certain skill sets into my life to help me build my business. I have more. I don't have more men than I can handle in my life, but I went from a place of being completely void of having male friendships to having a ton of them. And I do what I call man dates with men. And I'm going to be writing extensively about the process of dating another man for friendship. And I'm using the dating world as kind of my platform to explain that, because I think a lot of men have trouble having deep friendships with other men. So I'm going to teach them how to do that. And I just get so much out of those moments that, and it helps me be a better person in that moment with them. And when I return home and I interact with my wife, like, it all carries and connects through when you choose to see possibility and potential, and rather than problems and limitations.
Well, I think that's true. I think generally people migrate towards good people. End of story. I can't think of one uber successful negative person, and I was sitting there trying to rack my brains as you were talking. I can't. It must be positivity linked with action, the ability to overcome the fear that stops you doing anything, and then make it up as you go along. See what happens. And if it doesn't work, then just change direction, and don't have to consider yourself a failure that it didn't work. Just go, it was part of the learning curve.
Right. Well, that whole idea of failure, as opposed to, that moment or that thing I did, I didn't get maybe the result I was looking for. Now I have information and I can go do something else that's different, as opposed to being down on yourself about it. And, people who talk about being perfectionists, I think, and you also used the other word about fear, I think I like to discern fear as physical, physical bodily fear, getting chased by, a bear or a wolf or something like that. Most of the time when people are talking about the fear that they have about, I don't want to, I'm afraid to talk in front of a group or something like that. It's anxiety, and not fear. And it's because of lack of self-concept, lack of self-love, that is causing what we often think is something that's not part of our brain, like, there's a voice in my head and it's telling me I can't do this. That's you. That's you. That's not some external voice, unless you're possessed or you believe in, religions that have belief systems about external things getting implanted into your heads. I choose not to believe that. I choose to believe that if that voice is heard in my head, it is part of me, and I can have a calm discussion with myself and decide to give that thought a different meaning.
Is that the number one
changes?
Is that the number one thing that you feel not ruins people's lives? That's too strong, but means that people don't get the life that they want. That simple voice in the head fear.
I think I think we tend to be our own worst enemies, and that enemy is the talk that the things that we say, what I call the old recordings, which are neural networks. In the same way that your hand knows how to go pick up a cup of tea, and your muscles know what to do, and you can take your eye-hand coordination, you know how far away the cup of tea is. That's all habituated muscle activity. The same thing is true for our thoughts. So but if you have negative thought patterns that you don't think about, they just come up, unless you become aware of them, you will continue to do things that aren't in your own best interest.
And can you become aware on your own, or do you need to go to the Mantor or other people like yourself?
You don't, listen, I'm adverse to dogma and saying there's only one way to do anything. My way is one way. It is not the way. I did it by myself, actually. So I just know I could help someone probably do it faster and easier and smoother. But it is something you can do yourself, but it's also something that you can get help with. And if it's not me, there's 1,000 different perspectives that you could take on this. But the end goal is, are you taking care of yourself? Are you in your power? Are you acting? Are you talking to yourself and thinking thoughts that build self-love within yourself, that allow you to then take that out into the world and interact with other people by giving and exchanging love through integrity, through empathy, and with justice? That's important to me. And I have mostly figured out how to do that most of the time. I am not perfect. I am not enlightened. I am not the Buddha, but I'm aware. And awareness is a key part of it.
Well, I think that is a powerful point to bring us to the last part of the show, which we call a sermon on the mic. And this is where really I hand over the presenting duties to you. And you speak to the audience, you speak to yourself, you speak to your younger version of yourself. And just really tell us your beliefs of what life can be like. You've been through your dark periods. You're now in the lighter area now, and I wish you all the best, future successes. But I just want you, after the tune has played, to just let us know what's going on in your head and how we can create unstoppable motion just if we take a bit of action.
Sure.
Here we go with the best bit of the show, the sermon on the mic, the sermon on the mic.
Okay. Well, here's the most important things I've learned in my life so far. One, my reality is created by me. I get to choose how to take every piece of stimulus and how to experience it. Number two, spending time going back into the past and ruminating or wishing endlessly towards the future has almost no value. It's the present that counts and that creates my future. Number three, being totally accountable and responsible for everything that has, is, and will happen to me has given me the ultimate power, the greatest superpower I believe that any human can have, which is the power of choice. Number four, I think I didn't say that was number three, but number four, simplifying the way I perceive my existence in relation to my consciousness, the physical world, and other people has allowed me to be more aligned, centered, and positively oriented. Number five, relationships are the foundation of the human experience. The ultimate relationship is the relationship we have with ourselves, and diminishing one's ego equates to more positive, naturally flowing relationships outwardly. Number six, like attracts like. Therefore, negative thinking attracts negative experiences, and conversely, positive thinking attracts positive experiences. Number seven, creating stories for other people is the express route to endless frustrations when they don't, quote unquote, act the way that we wrote for them to act in our story. The only story you get to write is your own. Number eight, love is the ultimate positive emotion/experience, and it begets more and more love. Number nine, there is an infinite intelligence, or whatever else you want to call it, a God or source of which I believe everyone else is a part of, and being in alignment with that infinite intelligence is natural and effortless when you choose to believe it. Number 10, beliefs are thoughts that one holds as true facts, and they in turn drive our behaviors, oftentimes in unhealthy and self-limiting ways. Therefore, discerning which beliefs for you are helpful and which ones are not is a fruitful endeavor to embark on. And the last one is the pursuit of joy and love and less misery is the foundational ideology that guides my life from now on, which is why I created the website, Love More, Hurt Less, because those 4 words are the whole point of life for me now.
Brilliant stuff, Steven. Thank you very much. I'm glad you mentioned your website there. Is that the best way that people can connect to you?
That is an excellent way that people can connect to me, lovemorehurtlessaltogether.com. And I'm also on Twitter, which is my last name, @Shewach, SHEWACH. But easier is to just type in the hashtag #TheMantor, and you will find me instantaneously with that hashtag.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. Like all the guests that I have, I could really make these shows 4-hour conversations. I never really want them to stop. You've been so open and generous. I wish you total best of luck and good wishes for all your future ventures. And come back and speak to us again, because certainly I'm sure there's going to be more dots that we can join up. And remember, joining up dots is the only way to build our futures. Thank you very much, Steven Shewach.
Thank you, David.
That's the end of Join Up Dots. You've heard the conversation. Now it's time for you to start taking massive action. Create your future, create your life. It's the only life you've got. And we'll be back again real soon. Join Up Dots, Join Up Dots, Join Up Dots, Join Up Dots. Join Up